Thank you, sir. Please do so by filling out a speaker slip and handing it to our city clerk. And if we could get a roll call.
Councilmember Garcia.
Here.
Councilmember Cundiff.
Here.
Councilmember Molina.
Okay, we're going to excuse Councilmember Molina.
Mayor Pro Tem Manley.
Here.
And Mayor Cervantes.
Here, and let the record show that our city manager Cobal is here, our city attorney Flower is here, our city clerk Gertis is here, finance director Reed, right? Our community development director Lucia, still getting used to that title, is also here. Public works director Shakir, walking in. Our city engineer Thornton is here, our deputy fire chief Shaw, and our sheriff captain Escobar are here. And if our captain wouldn't mind leading us in the pledge, we would be honored. Thank you.
Begin. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk, do we have any communications from the public? No communications from the public, so we are going to move on to our one and only item, and that is our workshop session. Item 1, and I am going to hand that off to our city manager as he grabs the clicker.
All right, let's make sure that this is connected. Yes, all right. So, good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. So today I will be going through, and I added a lot of some background information on property taxes today. So that's the main reason that I'm going to be giving the presentation today. Obviously, our staff is going to be here to answer any detailed questions about individual departments. Obviously, Celeste, our finance director, has a lot of information as well because she was very deeply involved and led the process of putting this document together, and the many hours of coming up with this information. So with that, we're going to dive right into the presentation. So we're going to go through some fiscal year 25-26 accomplishments, and then we're going to go through the general fund. We're going to focus in on the general fund. And then, as we go through it, if there's questions or comments on things, we certainly want to have that. We don't need to wait for the end. So if you have a question, please feel free to stop me at any time, and we can answer those questions as we go along. So let's start with our fiscal year 25-26 accomplishments. So we did a number of things. So we have our Mountain View Park partially open. We had our library opening in the fiscal year. We purchased our new city hall. We celebrated our 35th anniversary, and we've had a record number of community events led by Yeza and Madi, doing a great job with all of those, along with the work of our public works staff, and really our entire team really comes up and comes through big for these things. That's in addition to their day-to-day jobs. So this staff really comes through and goes above and beyond for the community, and I couldn't be more proud of that. We completed our strategic plan workshop. We did a roof replacement of the senior center here. We finally completed, there's still a little bit of paving along County Line Road, but the County Line Road roundabout projects is substantially complete. We did a ADA project for the library. We're currently undergoing a safety element study. We entered into a park security contract for our cameras, which will be starting installation shortly. And then we just recently, Kelly completed the development and capital improvement project story map. So if you haven't checked that out already, I sent a link in my last report. And so a lot of great information, and that will be continually updated as new information comes along. And then finally, we had our new meeting agenda software and accounting software. And Celeste, would you be able to tell us when the go-live date for our new ERP will be?
Certainly. We're beginning, our go-live starts May 4th, and it's about a 3-week phase-in process. So we're very excited, very pleased to be at this point.
And again, that's, the staff here, the finance staff had to, did that in addition to all their duties as well, keeping things, paid and up to date. Bank recs, we're always updated on that. You hear cities that fall months, even years behind on their bank recs. We're always very current on those things. And so they were able to do that in addition to implementing this new software. Hopefully it's, short-term pain, long-term gain in terms of the efficiencies that it creates for them and accessibility of information for our staff. And really the staff also came through with this one too, because there was a lot of training that we did to get ready for this changeover. It's very different because the software we use today was implemented in 2003. So the technology has changed quite a bit. This will be a web-based system. And so we're Celeste said, we're very excited for this project. So let's jump into the fiscal year 27 general fund. I don't want to focus on this one too much because there is a bit of a change. So as of right now on this what matches what's in the your workshop agenda, shows about an $85,000 ongoing surplus. And that's really the focus, right? So that's the focus of what we look at on a year-to-year basis is our ongoing revenues covering our ongoing expenditures. That is the biggest indication of fiscal health. When you start to see one-time revenues or one-time reserves covering recurring costs, that's where concerns start to rise, and we see that in a lot of cities. And I'm going to explain a little bit why that might be, why we're seeing that, not just neighboring cities, but throughout the state on a more macro basis. We're not seeing it here today, obviously, and that is a big tribute to not just the staff and prior city managers, our finance director, and our entire staff, but also the city council and prior city councils of maintaining fiscal discipline. The one-time expenditures, those are mostly consisting of transfers out to replenish certain reserves. And so those are very strategic in nature, but they overall don't necessarily impact a lot of money going out the door. They're just moving money to other funds that are more appropriate for those particular reserves and making sure that we're hitting reserve targets. But I do have a revised version of this for information we learned recently. We got information from our insurance carrier, CIRA, and they let us know that they moved some of our liability to a different risk pool. So there is a general risk pool and there's a fire risk pool, and then they've taken on more and more fire agencies. And so what they did is that they noticed in liability claim costs that the risk level is a little bit different on the fire side. So by moving some of that to a different risk pool, it actually saved us $90,000 of what we had projected our insurance costs to be. So now our revised ongoing surplus is about $175,000. So a decrease in $90,000 of our expenditures results in that extra amount in ongoing surplus or net fund balance. So that's just something to keep in mind as we make decisions and things like that as we go forward. So looking at revenues, our largest revenue source, it consists of two categories. It's the property taxes of just over $5 million and the property tax in lieu of VLF of $1,778,000. So those two together are about $6.9 million. And so because that makes up 61% of our revenue, I felt it was a good idea to take maybe a deeper dive into kind of the history of how property tax works in California, because I think that does represent a lesson in terms of why a lot of cities are facing some fiscal challenges and why revenues are not keeping up with costs. And no, it's not because of mismanagement or inefficiencies or anything like that. There actually is a much more fundamental reason for that. And so we're going to go over that. It's, again, something that the city of Calimesa is not concerned with today, but it's something we should be aware of as we go forward so that as we make decisions, we keep these kind of things in the back of our mind to make sure that we understand the fundamentals of our largest revenues. We're also going to have a couple of slides on sales tax because that's also a significant portion of what we do. And governmental revenues, the primary source of that includes CFD1 revenues, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well, and that's about $925,000. So when you take those three revenue sources, property tax, sales tax, and CFD1, that makes up about 85% of our general fund revenue. So, and by the way, we do have copies. Do we have the copies? Does everyone have a copy of the? We do have copies coming of the PowerPoint presentation, so you'll all have hard copies of that in just a moment. So Prop 13 is the basis for property tax in California. It's one of the most famous propositions ever passed in California. It was a landmark proposition, and it continues to carry great popularity, and with good reason. So I just want to preface this by saying this is not a debate whether Proposition 13 and subsequent policy is good or bad policy. That's not the issue here. It's just about what is this policy, what is the impact on revenues for cities in California. That's really what this is about, right? And so Prop 13 did three major things. Well, it did four major things, actually, one of which is not listed. The first thing that's not listed is that it requires a 2/3 majority of the state legislature to pass state laws or additional state taxes. And so, but again, it doesn't have to go to a vote of 2/3 of the citizens. It's just 2/3 of both houses of the legislature and obviously the governor's signature to pass state level taxes. On the local level, it did three things for property taxes. Number one, it rolled assessed values back 2 years to the 1975-76 levels. So this was passed in 1978. It capped increases in assessed value at the lesser of CPI, I said CIP, it's actually CPI, a little dyslexia there, apologize, or 2% unless sold or substantially improved. So when a home sells, the assessed value is reset to whatever that sales price is. And it vests the power of to the state legislature to determine how property tax distribution is set. And I'll explain what that means a little bit in the next slide. Another proposition that was passed just 5 months later was Proposition 8. So this allows for the reduction of assessed value if the market value drops below assessed value. So let's say this happened a lot during the Great Recession. People bought at the height of the market, and then the prices crashed. And so there was a lot of Prop 8 valuations. And I'll talk a little bit more about Prop 8 in another slide. So remember I said the state legislature was vested the power to determine the distribution of property tax revenue. And so that was done through AB 8 back in 1979. And so what that did was it created the distribution ratio of property taxes, because remember, it set the rate at 1%, so it doesn't matter what was being paid before, and this will make more sense when we go to the next slide. But it also shifted $2.7 billion from school funding to city and counties, and then backfilled that to the schools. So the schools were still made whole, because as you're going to see, there was about a 50 to 60% reduction in property tax revenue as a result of Prop 13 right off the bat. So, and then in 1982, most people are familiar with Community Facilities Districts. So SB 2001 is known as the Melrose Community Facilities Act. So that's created CFDs. And so it helps fund infrastructure and services that used to be would have been funded under Prop 13 or under property taxes before Prop 13, but because of those limitations, that revenue went away. And so it allows the creation of CFDs, and typically those are created pre-development. So the developer, if there's a certain number of voters don't exist, the landowners can then vote to put in a CFD, and that's usually just one landowner. It's usually the developer that owns all those parcels, and they establish a CFD before anybody ever lives there. And it creates a parcel tax, not a property tax, an ad valorem tax. So that basically means it's not based on value. It's usually based on some other property characteristic, whether it's land use type or property size, whether it's lot size, or usually with homes, it's the size of the home. And so these are used by all sorts of agencies throughout the state. Cities, school districts, counties, special districts, all sorts of agencies use them. And we'll look at how that impacts Calumet a little bit later. So I talked about what happened with Prop 13 and it capping the tax rate at 1%. Prior to Prop 13, every taxing entity would set their own rate. They would say, we're going to charge X amount per $100 of assessed value. And the county assessor would assess the value of each property according to its value. So what was happening in the late 1970s was property values were going up significantly, and value in property tax rates vary greatly. So depending on the needs, like if a city had a large sales tax base, for example, they would have a lower property tax rate than other cities that maybe rely solely on or very, very heavily on property taxes. So each of these entities that you see listed here, and this is a hypothetical example. I don't have data that goes back this far, so these are kind of made up numbers. But it's just an illustration as to what each entity would charge. So the school district says, okay, we're going to charge 59 cents per $100, and fire district's going to 31 cents, and Riverside County is 24 cents. And this is meant to be kind of an illustration of what happened in the city of Calimesa prior to our incorporation. So this is around the 1978 time frame when Prop 13 was passed. And so basically your tax bill would be all of those different entities added up together, multiplied so that you get the total tax rate, multiplied by the assessed value, and that'd be your property tax bill. So in this case, this property was assessed a total of just under $1,800 based on a value of $113,000 or $114,000. With Prop 13, what they basically did was, so for example, if you look at the school district, the AB8 basically said, okay, the school districts collected $671 of that $1,800. So you just take that, the 671 divided by the 1,800 to get a percentage of 37.4%. So now going forward, the school district will get 37.4% of that property tax. Same thing with the fire district tax, et cetera, et cetera. So all those percentages add up to 100%. So, and the other thing was, remember I told you we rolled back the value of the assessed value. So now the assessed value of that same property is $104,000 rather than $114,000. So instead of 1.58% of $114,000, now they're paying 1% of $104,000. So their property tax bill went down by $700 essentially per year. Pretty significant percentage. So because I said each city set their own, or each entity set their own tax rate, and then Prop 13 basically uniformly said everyone's going to pay 1%. Doesn't matter how much they were paying before, they're going to pay 1% now. So because of that, each city varies widely in what they charge. So I looked at our city and I looked at Banning and Beaumont. So City of Calamesa's taxes portion of the 1% is 10.06%, and then the Calamasa Fire District is 19.7%. So Banning and Beaumont, you'll notice they don't have their own fire district tax like we do. So at some point in the past, the county had created a fire district to pay for fire services in unincorporated areas. So obviously, when the fire district was created, it predated Calamasa, but it was after Banning and Beaumont were created because they were created, in the 1910s and 20s. So that's why they don't have it and we do. So when cities incorporated after those fire tax districts were created, they would inherit the fire district tax into those cities. So all the newer cities in Riverside County have a fire district tax. The older ones do not. And so when you combine those, we get about 20, almost 30% of the property tax, whereas the city of Banning gets about 18% of theirs, and the city of Beaumont gets about 12%. You notice that in both cases, the county actually gets a higher percentage of property tax in those cities than the cities themselves do. So what are some things that happened after that? So AB8, I had mentioned, had created a bailout for cities as a result of revenue loss, right? But the legislature began to roll that back as they had started to have budgetary issues, because when Prop 13 passed and it lowered property taxes, remember, property tax is a deduction, is a tax deduction, right? So what the side effect of that was income tax went up because deductions went down. So there was more taxable income. So the state got a windfall as a result of that. So it kind of shifted some of the tax burden from the local governments to the state. And so that's how the state funded those bailouts initially. But as time went on, states started to see budget issues in the early and mid 80s. So they started kind of clawing that back. And then in the early 90s, we had the base closures as a result of the end of the Cold War and the S&L crisis. So that created a recession, and the state had a budget deficit. So what they did was they created the Education Revenue Augmentation Fund, or ERAF. And so they did 2 rounds of this in the early 90s, in 92, 93, and 93, 94, shifted money from the cities and the counties to the school districts. And what that effect had is that it basically lowered the state's obligation to schools. The schools didn't get more money. They just got more money from property tax and less money from the state. So in ERAF 2 actually is about the same amount that was originally shifted in the AB8 bailout, so that basically undid that in the early 90s. ERAF 3 was a temporary compromise, so that was only for 2 years. So each year there was $1.3 billion shifted from cities and counties to school districts, but then that was undone after 2006. And that facilitated the passage of Prop 1A. So that protected future shifts of money away from cities and counties. So basically, the state couldn't do budgetary tricks to basically shift money away from cities to plug their own holes. But it did grandfather in ERAF 1 and 2, so those still exist today. So if you look at the impacts of it, on the left is the pre-ERAF shift, on the right is the post-ERAF shift. And so you see all those on the left, that you see the key down at the bottom, all those that are highlighted in orange are entities that had money shifted from them to the ERAF. The biggest ones that were impacted were counties. So they got half of their money, half of their half of their allocation was shifted to the ERAF. 25% of the city of Calumesa's went to ERAF. So our percentage goes from 10.06% to 8.8%. But the fire one was not touched. That was not impacted by ERAF. So the larger shift from the counties had a bigger fiscal impact on them, obviously. And so when we look at annexations, and there's a longstanding agreement when you talk about when a city annexes some unincorporated territory, there's a 75-25 split, which means that the county retains 75% of that revenue from that annexation, and the city that is annexing to only gets 25%. And one of the driving forces of that is that ERAF shift because of the impacts that the county has had. Because not only, there's been kind of a double whammy on the counties. Not only did they have that money shifted away from them, but one of the things that the state has also done is they've shifted responsibility for certain programs, certain social programs, from the state to counties without necessarily enough money to be able to account for those. Some of it does come from sales tax. They do, some of the states' share of sales tax goes to the counties to pay for some of those programs, but it doesn't cover the cost of them. And so that's why the county is so adamant about keeping that 75-25 split. I know there's been a lot of talk about trying to change that ratio, because obviously cities are taking on the burden of providing services to those annexed areas. But the county argues, hey, we're already subsidizing a lot of programs that have been shifted to us, and that's why they fight so hard for that. So as a result, it creates about an 8.6% ERAF. So now 8.6% of property taxes in Calumet go to the Education Revenue Augmentation Fund even to this day. So we talked about the big property tax, but remember I talked also about the property tax in lieu of VLF. So prior to 2004, cities got vehicle license fees. So it's a 0.65% tax essentially on the value of the vehicles, right? It used to be at 2%, but what happened is that the state would only charge the 0.65%, but would calculate another 1.35% and transfer that to cities. So in 2004, the state decided to do away with that, permanently reduced the VLF rate to 0.65%. And so the way that they made the cities whole by taking that revenue away as a Prop 1A was they did what they call a triple flip. And so what that means is that, and again, we get about $1,778,000 from this property tax in lieu of VLF. So the state cut the VLF, and so that obviously stayed with the general fund, right? So what they did is they shifted $4.3 million to the K-4, to school districts and community colleges, and then in order to make the cities whole for that $4.3 billion, they took $4.3 billion of ERAF revenue and gave it to the cities and counties to make up for that. So it's a dollar for dollar swap. So the city still got the same amount of money, but instead of getting it from the state through VLF, they got it through property tax, additional property tax. So that's where that $1,778,000 comes from. It used to be VLF that we would get. But the nice thing about this is that the cities have benefited in the long run. That was the base year, and it would grow proportionally with your property tax. So whatever proportional share that a city gets in property tax, they would get that same percentage share of VLF or of property tax from ERAF to make up for the VLF. Well, over time, that number has grown more than VLF would. So if we had continued to get VLF, that dollar amount would actually be less than what we get from property tax. So that was actually a beneficial thing in the long run for cities and counties. Because remember, homes generally appreciate, cars usually depreciate. So your VLF will go down a little bit because it's based on the value of the car. So it does actually go down a little bit every year. So I had said that Prop 1A had eliminated the state's ability to shift revenues away from cities and counties to plug the state's budget woes, right? But they did have one last trick over their sleeves, and that was the elimination of redevelopment agencies. So what this did was it shifted money that previously went to RDA. So redevelopment agencies were agencies that cities could create that would basically freeze the assessed value in these what they call project areas, and any money that was made from that, any incremental amount, would go to this RDA. So the property tax. So if you go in there and say there's a blighted area, and let's say the valuation's $1 million in that area. The $1 million, the base valuation, the property tax from that would continue to go to the taxing entities. But let's say because of redevelopment, another $2 million in value was created. The property tax from that additional $2 million would go to the RDA. And the RDA would fund, would spur economic development. It was an economic development tool. And it would also fund infrastructure. So that was a major tool that cities used. UKIPA, for example, a lot of what they did, the revitalization of their downtown, and those roundabouts, things like that, that was RDA money. They used that. They used RDA money to do that because you can issue bonds against the RDA against that tax increment. So you're making an investment in the infrastructure there to spur economic development, raise values, and then pay those bonds off. That's how redevelopment worked. So all the money now that was going to RDAs now goes to a trust fund. It pays off the obligations because when RDAs went away, cities still had RDAs still had obligations. They had bonds outstanding, things like that, and they couldn't just say, "Okay, bondholder, sorry, you're screwed. You're not going to get paid anymore." So they take that money off the top to pay those obligations, and then the rest of it is distributed back to all the taxing entities according to that AB8 formula that we talked about before. So what the effect of that is that it was a windfall for schools, except for the fact that the more property tax money schools get, the less assistance they get from the state. So most school districts, except for very wealthy areas, most school districts didn't see a change. It just saw a change in their revenue mix. They got more property tax money, less money from the state. Well, lo and behold, shortly after the elimination of RDAs, the state had a big budgetary surplus. Probably about 2 years after that. And that's what created that, because their expenditures for schools went down by a significant amount. So when you look at, I talked about how Prop 13, there's a cap of 2%. So the assessed value, as long as you hold on to your home, your ad valorem tax, that 1% tax, can't go up by more than 2%. It could go up less. And there are 10 examples on here that it does go up less. But out of the last 50, there's 50 bars here. 10 of those, it was below 2%. The rest were above 2%. And so if it's less than 2%, then they get charged whatever that CPI is. So you can actually see in 2011, actually it was negative, so property taxes actually went down a little bit as a result of that. So if you look at CPI over the last 50 years, things cost about 6.6 times more than they did in 1977. That's what the index tells you. For Prop 13 properties, so those that have been owned for long term since Prop 13 went into being, there's not a lot of those, but there's, if you think about long-time homeowners, things like that, the assessed value has gone up about 2.5 times since 1977. So you can see how that difference, they're paying 2.5 times more for services that cost essentially 6.6 times more. So that you can see where that can start to create a problem. Now, wanted to show a couple of different, a little bit of different indicators. So this starts in 1990. This is Riverside County. So the base year is 1990. That's the year that we incorporated. So I just want to look at, okay, since Calamasa became a city, how has it looked over time for us? The first line, that gray line, is the median house prices. So median house prices are about 4.5 times higher now than they were in 1990. But you can see there's great fluctuations, and you can see where those fluctuations are. The prices spiked in 2006, then kind of cratered in 2008, 2009, up through about 12, and then started to go up again. Consumer prices are about 2.5 times higher than in 1990, and the Prop 13 index is about 1.8 times higher than it was in 1990, meaning if you owned a home since 1990, your assessed value is about 1.8 times higher than it was in 1990. Prop 8 had a big impact on homeowners that bought mid-2000s, so we saw a spike in Prop 8 claims, and I'll talk about that in a couple of slides. But what this tells us, what has kept the suppression of Prop 13 rates, because that 2% cap, from being a bigger issue, is that real estate has appreciated faster than CPI. But this only helps when there's property turnover, right? So you only see that difference, that spike in value, when something sells, right? Whether it's new construction or existing homes that sell, right? So like, let's say it's someone bought a house in 1990 and their assessed value is at $200,000, but their house is worth $500,000. Someone comes through, buys that house, now it resets up to $500,000. So it's going to be higher than it would have been with CPI. So that kind of counterbalances some of that impact of keeping the assessed values low. But in times when you don't have a lot of growth, you only see about a 2-3% turnover in houses in any 1 year. And in Calamasa, that's even a bigger deal because we do have a high ownership rate. We're about 90% of our homes are owner-occupied homes. So when you see older areas, like older cities that have little growth and low home turnover, they struggle more because they're not recovering as much of that suppression of revenue compared to CPI over a longer period because you don't have a lot of that turnover. So they don't get the benefit of that those spikes, and it's very unpredictable when those can come through. So another thing that we talk about with CFDs. So again, these were a tool brought forward as a direct result of Prop 13. It helps cities pay for a cost of serving new development. So prior to Prop 13, you could build in infrastructure costs in your tax rate, right? You could change your tax rate. It's like we need to pay for more, parks or roads or whatever, and you had much more control over that. So we created CFD1 in 2006 to fund the impacts of development on police, fire, including paramedic services, and parks. So JP Ranch, Singleton Heights, and Summerwin are all included in CFD1. And as I stated before, we get about $925,000 for that. So it funds things like the POP officer, the additional firefighter positions that we've added, additional public works staff to pay for park maintenance, things like that. So that's what that goes towards. And we have to be very careful about funding things that are additive, right? We can't supplant things that were existing in 2006, which admittedly wasn't a lot anyway, but it does pay for things that are additive, like the POP officer. It's probably the biggest example of that. And it takes up about half of that revenue. Then we also have CFDs that are specific to development. So this is Singleton Heights. There's two special taxes, one for facilities, which is like infrastructure, and one's for services. So the facilities tax drops off, which you see of infrastructure in the 25-26 rates. When those bonds are paid off for those improvements, those will drop off. You won't; those will fall off your property tax bill. But the services are ongoing. So developers are responsible for building infrastructure, and so the CFD is a funding mechanism for developers to pass those costs, or at least a portion of them, to the end user, the homeowners. So the developer typically will build the infrastructure, and then the bonds are issued to reimburse developers for those eligible costs. So some areas you see, like you see new development says, oh, there's no Melrose, low property tax rates. You see that advertised, right? But what this usually means is one of two things. Either the HOA dues are higher because they're having more things funded by the HOA, or you'll see a higher home price, because the home prices are usually dictated by the house payments, because most people take a mortgage of some kind out on their homes. And so that consists of four things, right? Your principal, your interest, your property taxes, and homeowners insurance, right? And maybe you could say HOA dues as well, right? Because if you have a really, some have like $400 or $500 a month. So in areas with CFDs, the property tax will be higher, meaning less is available for principal and interest, which drives down the price. So you'll see, you may see two developments, one with the Melrose, one without, but the prices in the Melrose, the no Melrose area, the house prices will probably be higher because you're not having to pay that extra tax. So this is also why, obviously, like interest rates, for example, like if lower interest rates means higher buying power, it just shifts things from from interest to principal, right? So you can pay for more house, quote unquote, with the same payment. So as you can see, the infrastructure rates are prorated according to the house size. So I talked about how it's a parcel tax, so there's different factors that go into determining what that tax is. And then the maintenance CFD is just the same for all homes. Everything's $1,049.53. And those do go up by a CPI every year. Those are all built in the CFDs that were established prior to home ownership. JP Ranch has a similar CFD. They're a similar structure, but they have different improvement areas related to different phases, and infrastructure needs may have varied from area to area, hence the difference in costs. And in Summerwind, improvement area 1 was the residential phase 1 parts. IA2 is Oak Valley Town Center, and improvement area 3 is Summerwind Commons. So they're not paying anything yet because it says non-residential developed areas, and obviously those are not developed yet. So once development is there, they start impacting services. They start paying those bonds off. So I talked about Prop 8. So this allows property owners to appeal their assessed value if they feel it's higher than the market value of their property. So we normally see this in commercial development. That's much more common in commercial development because, so I'll give you an example. A developer goes in, buys a mall, and then they tear down the mall. Now, usually when you look at your property tax bill, there's a value for land and value for structures. Well, if they tear down the structure, that basically eliminates that part of the assessed value. So they'll do a Prop 8 appeal once that demolition is done to lower their property tax rate, at least for the time that they're building. And then once it's done, then they'll get reassessed for the increased value of the improvements that they did. But they usually want to try to minimize that cost. So that's where you see Prop 8 used the most. But we did see a lot of that on the residential side during the recession. So people bought at the height of the market, and then prices went down. And so that's the example you see here. So Prop 13 establishes not only what the base price is, but also a baseline going forward based on those increases capped at 2%. So if you have a house that went up in value in year 2, it still only goes up by the 2% allowable under Prop 13. But in year 3, the market value drops, you can do a Prop 8 appeal, and then they reassess the value to that level. But then as long as it stays below that orange line in subsequent years, so year 3 or year 4 and 5, it actually went up by more than 2%, but it's because it's still below that prop. Like if you had never done an appeal and kept that Prop 13 value, you'd be paying what's on the orange line. But once the market value reaches and exceeds that orange line, it can't pass it again, right? So the green line is actually what the assessed value is. So it doesn't follow the market value anymore. So once the market value exceeds that Prop 13 value that's calculated on a year-by-year basis, it basically gets capped out at that amount. So that's how Prop 8 and 13 work together. So how does this actually look in practical, real terms? So this is examples of 5 different actual Calimesa property tax bills. So example 1 is an older house that was built and occupied since before Prop 13, no ownership changes. So, and by the way, so that means the assessed value is $25,000. If CPI had been used, I did some analysis, the assessed value would be $79,000 instead of $25,000. Example 2 is a house that was built in 2004 and was sold in 2020 for $555,000. So now the AV is $594,000. Example 3 is right next door to example 2, but the house was last sold in 2014 for $274,000. So sold for a lesser amount further in the past. So now the net assessed value is about $329,000. Again, if CPI was used, that same assessed value would be $371,000, but the value is $562,000 because it's a smaller home. Example 4 is located in Singleton Heights. That was built in 2014 and last sold in 2019. And example 5 is in Summerwind, built and sold in 2020 and still held by the original owners for $464,000. So the middle solid column bar for each of these examples, the light green base of each bar is the 1% property tax portion of their bill. So whatever their assessed value is times 1%, that's what that portion is for each house. The olive green above that are school bonds, so debt service on school bonds. Those are also a percentage of value, so they're can vary depending on the bond that's issued. Those can be both school district and community college bonds. That yellowish orange that's above that, if you see in examples 4 and 5, that's those are the city CFDs, so CFD 1 and the applicable CFD for that particular development. And then the last 2, there's a gray and a grayish blue. It's hard to see those there because they're pretty small. Those are other CFDs and special assessments. So special assessments, for example, Metropolitan Water District has a small one, San Gregorio Hospital District, there's some other entities that do have special assessments on top of that. So then the left hashed column is the total property or total bill as a percentage of assessed value, and the right hashed ones, the one in red, is the property tax as a percentage of market value. So you can see that there's a big fluctuation between these two. In example 2 and 3 show that people on the same block can have very different bills, right? Even though they're paying for the exact same services. And that's kind of one of the dichotomies that are created. It does create a thing. It just depends on when you bought your property, when you sold it, those kind of factors. So this all kind of goes into what we see here. So for we obviously property taxes flattened out over the last few years. So for cities that have had little growth for over a longer period, they probably would see flat all the way across. But this is why you see so many cities struggling and proposing sales tax increases, because when you see turnover and no new construction, that obviously will give you a nice boost. But over time, those taxes by design are not going to keep up with inflation. They're just not. They're not designed to. So again, it's not about whether it's good policy or not. It's about, okay, this is the policy we've been handed. Here are the impacts, and that's what I think that's the only reason I wanted to present this. I know it's a lot of information, but I think it's information that's worth sharing because there's a lot more detail to the story than people realize. And so it's not an accident that you see so many cities struggling. It's not just all these cities are inefficient. As a matter of fact, they've had to do, the term doing more with less has been a mantra in city government the last 30 years, really. And they've had to do that because of these changes. And the last resort usually is asking for tax increases because nobody wants to do that. Staff doesn't like it any more than councils do, and it's because it's hard, and it's hard to ask people to pay more money. But part of it's because, what benefits were gained from Prop 13, maybe unless tax burdens on property tax side have maybe been filled by other types of taxes, right? Because there was maybe more capacity to pay those, so those have been filled by usually by income taxes. That's usually been the biggest one, and that's purely a state revenue. That's nothing that we get to see at the local level. And so when people say I pay too much in taxes, it's because the state has taken that excess capacity to and appetite and filled it with other taxes that benefit the state, that don't benefit local services. So that's the story on property tax. All right, so any questions on that before we move on to sales tax? I know it's, again, a lot of information, but okay, we're good? All right. So sales tax, believe it or not, city does not get all the sales tax. We get about 14%, so 1% of the 7.75%. What's taxed? Tangible goods, both retail and business sales, but this is sales to the end user, right? So wholesale things are not, so like if I'm a wholesaler and I sell to a retailer, I don't charge property, or so I don't charge sales tax to that retailer. The retailer only charges it. So each good only gets taxed once. You don't see things taxed multiple times in terms of how that distribution works. Maybe an exception to that would be used car sales. So you pay a sales tax on a new car. If that car gets sold, there's sales tax paid on that car again. So that would probably be the one big exception to that. But for the most part, if you go from wholesaler, like manufacturer to wholesaler to retailer, only the end user of that product is charged sales tax. You don't see the sales tax up the chain from that supply chain. That makes sense. But there's a lot of things that are not taxed in California. And so this just gives you kind of a list here. But really, there is a book that talks about sales tax exemptions, and there's 15 pages of exemptions like this. So it equates to about $20 billion a year of exemptions on sales of certain items. Services, both services and products. So what does that mean? That means when you look at, when measured as a percentage of state personal income, California's sales tax base is actually the second smallest in terms of the base of goods that get charged for sales tax in the United States. So looking at the rate is one thing, but there could be states that charge a lesser rate, but they tax more things. So I'll give you an example. When I was in Texas, I went to a museum, and I paid a sales tax on my admission to that museum, but you don't pay that here. So it's things like that. If you go to a bowling alley, you go to a movie theater, there's sales tax assessed on that transaction in that state. It's not charged here. So that's just one example, kind of anecdotal, but it's an example of how that can vary from state to state. So looking at the rate only tells you part of the picture, I guess, is the point. So again, we've talked about this before. Despite inflation, our sales tax continues to be pretty flat. We do expect, it's not built in here because we don't want to plan for it, but we do expect to see a little bit of an increase, a little bit of a spike due to the gas prices. It's kind of, a double-edged sword. On one hand, we don't like to see the higher prices, but on the other hand, since fuel is our biggest sector in terms of our sales tax mix, the city does see a little bit of an increase on the sales tax portion of fuel sales as a result of those higher prices because it's a percentage of the price. Right? Again, gas taxes themselves are based on a per gallon rate, a flat per gallon rate. So the price of fuel, like if you see a price go up, the amount of fuel tax, the gas tax itself you're paying is still the same because it's just based on its X cents per gallon. Doesn't matter what the price is. So that's the difference between sales tax and gas tax. So looking at our expenditures, again, this is something that we've talked about a lot and we see in almost every city. Usually, what they say is you budget for your priorities, and we've talked about how public safety is a priority, and that's not unique to Calamasa. I think that in most cities, the number one thing that they see a city provide is public safety, and so your budget reflects that. Almost $7 million in expenditures between our police and fire department services. But how do we grow from one year to the next? So I put this chart together to kind of show kind of some detail as to what happened from the budget the council adopted in 26 to the budget we're proposing in 27. So there's things that went up, things went down. So the first thing I did was, okay, again, we want to focus in on ongoing versus ongoing, right? So we took out the one-time expenditures because those are one-time expenditures. We subsequent to the adoption of the budget, we granted an increase to our fire department for salaries and benefits, so that's accounted for here. The council approved healthcare contribution increases, which are accounted for here as well. These $143,000 for employee merit increases, those are related to the step increases that our employees get upon completion of a successful year. Usually it's 5%. We have several new positions that are being proposed, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides. That's $230,000 in cost to the general fund. For our sheriff's contract, we broke this out between the increase in rates and additional 1 hour per day. So the contract has been running at what we call 107% of the contract. So basically, our base rate is for a 24-hour deputy, but there's occasion where they send a second deputy into Calamasa, and we pay for that. So we've already budgeted for 1 hour a day, and so we're now, because of where the contract's been running and trending, we're adding another hour a day. So we're basically paying for 26 hours a day. And then in addition to that, we're also paying for the POP officer. The POP officer's on top of those 26 hours. The insurance number, $83,000, I'll put a little bit of an asterisk next to that one because we had talked about earlier about how our insurance is going down. So you can basically eliminate that because this is based on the numbers you have in your budget that are presented in the book today. But again, that was some good news, so that $83,000 essentially goes away. And then we looked at various other increases. These are increase in contract prices, basically our operation maintenance, to capture inflation increases in various contracts. And so that's what reflected there. And there's many different areas where that is too many to list. But it only ends up being, roughly, about less than 2% of the overall increase. So. And then we looked at our cost allocation plan and made some changes based on some of the trends that we were seeing and capacity and other special funds to reimburse for costs. So these are costs that are provided to the general fund to those various funds. And so we reallocated some of our salaries to our special funds and increased our cost allocation. So that did result in some savings to our general fund as well. And again, this all originates from our, number one, our workload, mostly related to public works in terms of the services that they're providing to special areas, and also our adopted cost allocation plan. So these are all studied very carefully and have detailed justifications as to what these numbers are. We had been undercharging according to our cost allocation plan because of the capacity of some of our funds to be able to fund them, and we went back and reevaluated those, and they were able to pay. And then, of course, adding in the one-time expenditure of $15,000 to get to our proposed budget. So that's kind of the flow of where we get. It gives you a good snapshot of how we went from one year to the next. So when we're talking about RSO increases, our long-term increase over this time was about 5%, but more recently 7%. We've talked about this in detail, especially last year. There was some contract negotiations that took place with the Sheriff's Department, increases in salaries, things like that for retention purposes. About 86% of the overall increase is directly related to deputy costs, which would basically be wages and benefits. So the good news is that the vast majority of those increases are not going into some kind of county bureaucracy. They're going directly into the pockets of our deputies and our sheriff's partners. So, sometimes you see these increases, and sometimes a lot of it's siphoned off to other county services to kind of subsidize things. The good news is that, it's a very healthy percentage that actually is going toward deputies. And so again, this is the trend line of our operations costs. And so the last one, if you were to go back to fiscal year 21, you'd see a drop off there because 22 is when we added the POP officer. And so this just shows the overall trend, mostly reflecting increases in the rates. But again, we also talked about the increase in hours that we're trying to reflect in the budget based on our actual usage of Sheriff's Department services. So again, that 107% of the contract issue. And then looking at the Fire and Community Risk Bureau, you see that we actually kind of flattened out here a little bit. We're changing. We went through and worked with Chief Shaw, and we really wanted to fine tune some of our operation maintenance areas to areas to numbers, because we have been coming under budget. When we look at budget actuals, there have been years where we're actually coming in significantly under budget, and so I said, let's sharpen our pencils a little bit. And the fire department, we really looked at this, and I do appreciate Chief Shaw's help on that and coming up with more with realistic numbers that are reasonable for them to operate under. And again, the thought is that if there's, I want them to plan for anticipated normal routine maintenance. If there's something extraordinary, we can always come back and talk about that, because if it's extraordinary, that should mean it's one time in nature, right? If things are happening over and over, then then maybe it is routine. But a lot of times I think we're budgeting for the just in cases that probably really are one time. So we really went through and refined those things. And we also wanted to make sure we were realistic but not sacrificial on our training budget as well. So that was one thing that Chief and I looked at very carefully. We wanted to make sure there was a good balance of making sure that our firefighters are well trained and we have sufficient budget for that. So we really did a deep dive into that to make sure that the funding available for that is reflected here, and we believe it is. And so again, this is prior to the additional information we got on our Sierra insurance, but you can see though, even if you bring the fiscal year 27 down to fiscal year 26, you can still see that the increase is significant. It's over doubled over the last 5 years from 22 to 26. Significant increases. But this shouldn't be too surprising because we see this in our personal lives, right? We see it in our homeowners insurance, car insurance, we're all facets of insurance, and so cities are not immune for that. So again, we're not immune from the pressures of inflation any more than anybody else is, whether it's a business or individuals. If prices go up, we have to pay those same prices. It's not that we get a special deal or anything like that. But again, I do appreciate Sierra's work in making sure that they're putting us in the right risk pools and reflecting our costs that way. So it does give us a little bit of a relief this year. But for fiscal year 28, we're going to probably have to anticipate similar increases. So it's probably a one-time type of deal in terms of increases. But again, it'll be at least increasing from a lower base. It's not going to be going Act 573 and then beyond that. At least we're not having to make up for that. But again, we do anticipate. I don't know if there's anything that's going to happen that's going to significantly change that, unfortunately, anytime soon. So we are proposing 3 new positions, and staff is available to discuss these further if needed. We are proposing a maintenance worker 1 or 1/2, and so we're saying 1/2 because we want to have a little bit of flexibility. There are pros and cons to hiring a 1 versus hiring a 2. 2 is journeyman level, has some experience. A maintenance worker 1 is an entry level position. But we've also had a lot of success in hiring at the maintenance worker 1 position. You usually get somebody, they may be a little green, but maybe they're very enthusiastic about their job, and they can learn the Cal Mesa way, and we can train them the right way. And so you usually get some more enthusiasm from employees like that. So there are some benefits that maybe you lose on the experience end, but you get on the being able to mold them in their drive for the job. And then it also will, we're budgeting in a way that will allow them to work into a 2 position as well, and having that opportunity, not only for them, but maybe for existing staff as well. So that's the reason we're budgeting for it that way. We are proposing an associate planner position. What this would do is would largely replace contract planning. So we've been using a contract planner 2 days a week here at the city from Michael Baker. And there's been some, fluctuation in that position, and people leave, and we get reassigned somebody, and we lose institutional knowledge, and we're only getting 2 days a week of coverage. And so we are proposing a new in-house position, which would be a full-time position. So that will increase our capacity in the planning, in the community development planning department. And it'll also, we do get some offset from being able to charge to our developer deposits. So whenever planning is doing work, or public works or engineering is doing work specific to a development, we do charge for that. We do charge that development for that, so that the taxpayers aren't paying for that. They should only pay for more of the general, quote unquote, general services, or services that we charge a fee for. We have a fixed fee for. Obviously, we'd incur that cost, but we do make up for that on the revenue side. But anything that has a developer deposit to it, we do charge all of the staff time to that, and it's fully burden rate, by the way, to those different positions. And lastly, a human resources and risk manager position. We have an impending retirement, and so we're obviously planning for that. And that, with the complexity that we've added, with the fire department and the HR challenges, and again, with looking at insurance and risk management, there's just more and more that is done with that function. So we believe it's time to fill that position. Now, this is not the full cost of a full year of this position. It's only 7 months of the 12. So we do have some planned and some overlap with our future retiree. But we felt we don't need to hire that position July 1st, whereas the other two, as soon as the budget's adopted, we're going to start recruiting for those positions. But this one, we're probably going to hold off a month or two. We still want to start the recruitment soon, but we don't have to start it up right away. But again, we're gonna kind of work our way backwards to, okay, what is a reasonable recruitment timeline to get someone on board by December 1st? So that's our goal. Not included in this budget is any COLA increases. So again, that's where that $175,000 comes into play, right? So there is some flexibility for the council to consider that, and any benefit increases aside from what we've already presented. So, for example, the increase in health insurance contribution, that was already granted, and that's reflected in the budget, but there's nothing on top of that. So when you look at a reserve, this is in line with the reserve policy that the council has approved, and so we have a number of different reserves for a number of different of areas. But what this shows is that we continue to be very fiscally healthy. Again, we have just over, when you take out mobile home rent, it's just under $4 million in terms of our unreserved fund balance. But we do have our contingency reserve in there, fully funded, our insurance fund, capital projects fund, vehicle replacement. These balances are all in line with your reserve policy. And again, by the way, this could change because it'll be reflected based on final numbers from 26 too, right? So this assumes certain spending in 26 for beginning balances, and then assumes all is spent in 27. So again, this is the actual results will differ from the projections. Just it's for simple fact that whatever 26 ends up could have this fluctuation. Normally, we see a little bit more because we usually come in under budget. We just don't know what that number is, so we just assume that all of it gets spent. So on the capital side, not a lot to talk about here, but we did want to highlight a few things. We are doing some ADA ramps throughout the city in accordance with our ADA transition plan. We do have $150,000 in park security currently funded through, proposed through DIF. Now, there may be some fluctuation to that when we come to the final budget because there's some additional costs that we're looking at for Mountain View Park that we may incur with some options that we would share with the council before we move forward with those. But that would probably impact the amount available for park security. Citywide pavement management, this is from various sources, not just, this is from Measure A and gas tax and SB1 funds. $1.3 million is what we're proposing, and staff does plan on coming to the council soon with some options as far as what streets to pave, so be on the lookout for that. We are proposing personal protective equipment for fire of $125,000 per year in fiscal year 27 and 28. Again, keep in mind that the council, when they adopt the budget, even if you're adopting a 5-year CIP, the out years are just estimates. You're not actually adopting those numbers, those hard numbers. You're only adopting for appropriation the number that you're appropriating for fiscal year 27. So that would obviously be in front of you in 28 again next year. A cardiac monitor pulse machine for the fire department, $80,000. Housing element, we just got our approved, it feels like not too long ago, and guess what? We got to start working on it again, and it's not cheap. Thank you, HCD. We are looking at adding some budget software, so we are just getting through the ERP implementation. We're not sure about when we have some software fatigue a little bit, so we're looking at timing on that. But we do believe that would be something beneficial in the long run, again, for efficiency in-house, and also allowing for more tools for the public to see, get a little bit better sense of reading our budget. Our budget, I will say, is very, very detailed. We probably prepare more of a detailed budget than most cities do in terms of, we not only have like line item detail, like account level detail, but we actually have detail underneath that shows you exactly what we're spending the money on. You don't see that in a lot of places, that level of detail. But the budget software would help. We do rely on Excel spreadsheets that are linked, and a lot of those links, you've got to make sure that all those files are open to make sure the links work, because sometimes they don't, and you get reference errors, and you have to then close it out and open it again. And so it does take time and energy for the finance staff to put that stuff together, but again, they do amazing work with that. And lastly, our playground equipment is due for some overhaul at Mountain View Park Phase 1. So those were installed in 2014, 2013, 2014 era. So those are due. So we do regular inspections of all of our playground equipment. So we want to make sure that our playground equipment is in tip-top shape for our kids to enjoy. So looking ahead, again, we expect to see minor revenue increases. We don't build anticipated development into our projections for revenue, just because there's things that get approved and then they stop, right? And it's Celeste, and I always joke with Celeste. I said I don't believe that. I really don't count on the revenue being there until I see vertical development. Well, now you see what is happening with Dutch Brothers, so I don't even believe that. So now I probably need to go, C of O is probably the time that I probably need to look at that. It's just, it's unpredictable, and so we're better off not anticipating that rather than anticipating that it not coming, because we've seen cities close by that have counted big time, have gambled big time on their development that didn't happen, and it cost them. So my recommendation is that we don't do that and put ourselves in that same boat. A salary increases of 5%, that accounts for, we're getting more and more to the point where we have more and more employees getting to that top step, but we still have a significant number that aren't, so we still have to build that into the budget in terms of those increases. And then software annual subscriptions. Most softwares are now, you don't buy them out of the box and just pay for them once. It's an annual subscription, right? And the industry standard is 5% increase. Every single contract we see, they always propose 5%. Seems arbitrary to me, but that's what they've been. And again, we have had a long-term average of 5%, but 7% of the Sheriff's Department in the next 3 years. The Sheriff's Department actually will be doing a presentation on the details of their anticipated increases later this week. So we're going to be, unfortunately, I think we're going to be able staff to attend to that, but Captain and I'll follow up with Captain to kind of go over what that'll look like for Calamasa. So our next steps here are to have a discussion. You have had a chance to review the budget details. So staff is all here to answer your questions, and any changes that are asked for here or anything that comes up between now and budget adoption, we'll summarize those, and so that you can see what's changed from today to that time. And so our anticipation is that we're going to present the budget for final adoption on June 1st. So before we wrap up, I do want to thank a number of people. First, our accounting staff led by our finance director, Celeste, Alana Figueroa, who does a lot of the putting together the document, and a lot of helps with the personnel costs, which is a complicated task. So she does a lot with that. All of our department heads, again, I really appreciate that everyone is practical and just very reasonable in terms of their asks. They're looking at their needs, not versus their wants. They're not just throwing everything out there, seeing what sticks. Everyone's being very realistic in terms of their requests in the budget, and that's very much appreciated. Our administrative team, obviously, they put together our budget books with a lot of care, and so we appreciate their help. And lastly, but certainly not least, our finance committee, consisting of Mayor Cervantes and Mayor Pro Tem Manley. It was a great discussion, a lot of good feedback out of that discussion, and so we appreciate you guys' efforts in helping us out craft this budget. So with that, that'll conclude my presentation. Again, myself, staff, we're all here available to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very thorough, complete review. We appreciate that. And thanks again also to staff for your work on this. A lot of materials to prepare, a lot of numbers to crunch, so thank you. I'm going to open it up for any questions from council at this point. We'll start with Councilmember Cundiff and then just work our way around the table.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't specifically have any questions. It's just more gratitude, I guess, to Celeste and her team and to our city manager for how they outlined this and the background as far as how the taxes come to us and understanding that. And it's dumbed down in a way so we can understand it, very well. And I don't mean that, disingenuously to you. It's just, it's nice to have it that way so we can get it. But I appreciate that. I did speak with Councilwoman Molina, and as she's sick and not able to be here this evening, she did ask me to bring up a couple points that she had. Not sure if this is where we will work some of those ideas in, but moving forward, she was hoping that there might be some discussion amongst the council for some promoting of like local arts and any kind of future sites, such as parks or things of that nature, facilities where we can have these kind of events and where those revenues may come from, not necessarily at this particular time, but that we keep that in the forefront of our mind. So I told her that I would share that. And the next thing that she asked about pertained to, and I know this has been brought up a couple of times, but travel expenses for the council as it pertains to different events that we can attend that would be beneficial to the city. So as collectively as the council, we have a very limited amount of funding for that, and that's fine. We do with what we can. But there are times where there are events, whether it's a Cal Cities event or a Sheriff's Department event or something, where there's information that, we may be able to attend, where we can gather information and bring that back to us. And we don't necessarily want to always deplete the funding that we have for those travel expenses. So something else that is not just on her mind, but mine as well. I'm not sure how the rest of the council feels about that. But when we do evaluate that, the hope is that we would collectively look at that and be able to, as a whole, approve those things as they come up, right? So we don't just arbitrarily all run off and go spend a ton of money going to these different events, but as a whole decide, hey, this council member or this mayor pro tem may be the best person suited to attend this event, and then we decide collectively, yes, that's the best way to do this, and then send that person and allocate funding for that.
Now that you say that, it does remind me that was something we had talked about. I've talked to some of you about having that discussion during budget time, and so maybe too quick. I don't know if we could put the list together, but we pretty much know the events that we attend every year, right? I mean, I think it's pretty consistent.
Yep.
We do have we were just talking about our staff meeting today. We do have a light agenda for next Monday. I'm not sure if, Darlene and I can work on this. We might be able to bring this back as soon as May 4th, but it may need to wait to the 18th. But we could bring that back for discussion as a separate item.
Sure.
I think that would be a good idea. And then maybe we can just, even talk about setting a calendar for the year, saying, okay, here are the events we anticipate to attend. And, if you guys want to talk about amongst yourselves about who we want to designate to go to those events ahead of time. And that way we can set a budget and everyone kind of knows and everyone kind of has an idea of where everyone's going. And, it makes it a lot more predictable for us in terms of costs and things like that. Because right now, we have an allocation for each of you, and some of you use it all, and some of you don't use it at all. And you have to move. We're borrowing money from one to the other, and it's like kind of it's kind of gets convoluted a little bit, right? So maybe there's an opportunity to do that. I don't know if that's what the council would maybe want to entertain, but we could certainly bring that back for further discussion.
Absolutely. Sounds good. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great idea. Anyone opposed to that? I think that's a fantastic idea. Add the calendar and council member expenses to the next agenda. Good. Yeah.
Is that something that we'd still work into the budget? Say, I was just thinking for simplicity, if there was, say we made an adjustment to that, like a small increase to that across the board, because we do, share those funds. If there was a small increase for each person, I mean, a larger pot, and then ideally we should be able to cover stuff without trying to make a complicated calendar for the entire year. I mean, it probably hasn't been increased for quite some time, I would imagine.
I don't think it has. No, you're right.
Well, I like the idea of the calendar just for the simple reason that we can know that we're going to have somebody attending that. Now, whether that individual can't make it or not, we can still figure out somebody else. So if there's an event, for instance, Cal City's event that, is a policy issue, then I'm going to do everything I can to be there, right? Because that's the committee I'm on. But if it's a different thing, like the end of the year Cal City's event, and we say, okay, we're going to allocate 2 of us to go, and maybe yourself and the mayor are going to do that, and then you can't do it, then okay, now we know we can fill it in with somebody else, but we've already allocated the funding for it, so they've budgeted for it. I like that idea.
I like that idea, too.
But I think I'm jumping ahead. I think probably we need to wait until our next.
That's that.
Yeah, I think that's something, the options we can bring back, right? Do we want to do it on a per person basis, or I think that was probably of an era because everybody wanted to go to everything. And it's like, okay, well, we can't do that, so you're given a budget individually, right? I think we don't really have that as much this year. There's varied levels of participation, both because of desire and also because of time, right? I mean, not everyone has time to go everything. We have 3 of you that work full time, right? In addition to this, so. I think that, we do know the big events that we can go to, and we can estimate the cost of attending each of those. And so rather than doing it by per person, we can just do it by event. We're going to spend X number for this event, Y for this event, and these are the ones that we plan on attending, and then you guys can designate who those people are going to go. And like you said, we could always make an adjustment for that, but or you could even just say, 2 people will attend this, and 1 person will attend this, and however we want to do it. There's some cities, all 5 go to certain events. I'm not saying we do that here, but that if that's what the council wanted, we could certainly do that.
Spirit of it, I think, to try to utilize the funding that we have most appropriately, so that we're not just arbitrarily all of us running to one event that is not necessarily needed. We need to be fiscally sound as well with these dollars, and I think that's the spirit of conversation that we need to have on that.
Yeah, so what we could do is we can look back at the events that have been attended and the major ones that we haven't necessarily attended every year, but we can just give you a menu of, okay, here's the events, here's the cost to attend those events based on where they're at, and that way you'll know the costs, and then you can kind of just add all those up. Maybe because one's up in Northern California, only 1 person goes, but if it's in Southern California, it's local, then 2 can go, or even 3 can go, because all you have to do is pay a registration, that kind of thing. We can bring all that back for you, and then at least you'll have all those dollar amounts, and we have the total amount that we still budget for a total amount for council travel, in the aggregate. and then you guys can have all that information, and then we can kind of pick and choose how many, who go, how many go to which event, which ones we want to do, which ones we don't want to do. We can decide all that stuff. At least you'll have the information to make those decisions.
Yeah, I got some input on that. I like the idea of increasing the funds for all of us. I kind of understand like selecting, based on more experience and stuff, but just thinking more in the future, some of us will have less experience, like myself, I have less experience because I'm a newly elected council member compared to my other colleagues. They have been doing it for years, even with planning commissions and stuff, and I don't, but I kind of see like the pros and cons behind it, because if the majority will say, well, so-and-so doesn't have experience, for example, Garcia doesn't have experience for that meeting or that conference, I won't be able to go. Those conferences are built for educational reasons, because that's where you go to learn and kind of learn the policies and network with other city members or whoever's out there. So I see the pros and cons behind it, even if it's not me, but whoever comes in as well too. We have to kind of treat ourselves equally across the line instead of just selecting the ones with the most experience. So that's one of the biggest things that I will definitely push back if we go based on the ones with the most experience. Same thing with elected officials with the counties and stuff too. For the newly elected one from last year and this year as well too, and I'm not saying I'm going to be attending to all of them, because of course I have little ones too, so I'm very selective of where I'm going to be going, and if it's far, I won't be able to go. I've been very transparent with that, but I think we should probably keep it the same all the way across for all council members.
Yeah, and again, that's definitely up to the prerogative of the council as a whole and what you decide. What staff can just do is we can kind of bring the framework we have today. We can talk about we can bring a menu, like I said, of all the events that we normally attend. If there's any out there that we haven't attended that you have interest in that you would want to send to me for us to put on that list, just so we can give an estimated cost. Again, it's just about setting, okay, and again, we don't have to, the council doesn't have to set who's going to attend what for the entire year right now. We don't have to do that. You could, but you don't have to. Well, all we're saying is, okay, we're going to attend these events, this many people are going to, we anticipate this many people will go, here's the cost. And so is it in the budget number that we have? Does it need to be more? However, or if we just want to just increase the amount per person across the board, certainly that can be an option too. So it's just more of a forum for the council as a whole. We'll put it in the agenda. It'll be a very open conversation, and then we'll just ask council, or staff will just ask for direction, and we'll adjust the budget accordingly.
So one last question on that topic. So when we bring it back for next week, we'll have time to make adjustments before we...
Yes, yeah, like I said, I'm not sure if I'll be able to bring it back next week or if I have to wait 2 weeks, because our agenda deadline's upon us already. So trying to do some of that research in terms of the costs of what those events are, and also giving time for council members if there's ones like, hey, there's this other one that we haven't really attended before, but it might be beneficial to us to consider. That way it allows us to take a little time to anticipate that. But even if we were to do May 18th, all it really ends up being is just adjusting one line item in the budget. Is really what it comes down to, right? I mean, that's all it really is. And so we could make that change. Celeste just would need to know, okay, don't print the budget books until that conversation takes place. That's the only thing. That'd be the biggest thing. So, but we're only talking about one line item in the budget when it comes down to it. They didn't overpromise for you.
Right, good feedback on that. Councilmember Garcia, any other additional comments about the budget?
Actually, I want to give a big shout out for Kelly. I did saw the GIS timeline story. We put a lot of work on it because I created one myself, so I like how everything was just very straightforward and just catches your eye. And then the people that actually know how to use it, I was playing around with it, so I was like, oh, this is nice. And I am happy that the team is going to start growing because I know a strong team is strong, but it's time to get bigger. And now with the new city hall, but besides that, you guys have been doing a great job, and I'm amazed as well too, based on all the hard work that you guys put into today's budget. I know it's been months, and it's a lot of work. So thank you guys for that.
Thank you, Councilmember. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I said a couple quick questions. The first, I guess probably maybe for Will, for the maintenance worker. I'm just looking at the new positions. Just I know you gave it just a little more in-depth explanation of it, but maybe for the public and for the rest of the council, for that first maintenance worker, maybe explain kind of your vision for how they're going to work and operate, and the need for the added personnel at this time.
So I think in an ideal world, first of all, I think we probably, and I think our goal, is we're going to try to maybe add one more additional, maybe in the following year. I think ultimately where we want to end up is having 2 teams of 3. So we have our superintendent now, and then we'd have 2 leads, maintenance worker 2 and maintenance worker 1 on each team. And that will allow us to expand our hours. But really, it's just right now, the position is about just adding capacity and trying to maybe allow our superintendent not to have to do so much work in the field, because he does do a lot right now. He probably still will have to do quite a bit, but again, it's just another body to be able to respond to more things around the city, with additional park responsibilities now with with Mountain View Park, the expansion there, and also, trying to make sure that we can transfer some of their maintenance responsibilities from Summerwood Park back onto city staff as well, because we do have a contract currently with Beaumont Cherry Valley, but I believe they're looking to exit out of that because of staffing capacity that they have. So we will need additional capacity for that. So that's a big part of that as well. Madi, I don't know if you wanted to add anything additional to that, because you're very familiar with those operations.
Yeah, I think historically we've been very reactive when it comes to public works and any maintenance issues that are out around town. And for the past few years, we've been able to get a little bit more proactive and be able to, do striping programs, do sidewalk inspections and stuff. But there's still some things that we can improve on and be a little bit more proactive with. And I think this will just help with us being able to tackle that. And I mean, we do have a new park that just came online. We just bought the Bank of America building, which is another facility that we have to do maintenance on. And then our Summerwind and Singleton Heights, those streets are not going to be new anymore. So, we're going to see a lot more maintenance over there as well. So.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the explanation. And then just on the associate planner, I can recall those costs when we were contracting that work out. I was trying to get a better understanding of what some of those costs we would save on and what that would look like.
So from my perspective, I think the costs are going to be relatively similar, but what we're going to get is a lot more hours. So we're currently paying about the same amount, and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think it's about the same amount for 2 days a week part-time versus having an entire full-time position dedicated to not only extended counter hours in the community development building, not only just extended hours, but also being able to, sorry, over here, being able to focus my time really on other items. I know Will and I are both interested in expanding economic development opportunities in the city and working on, some of our large master plan communities while being able to maintain a high level of service for some of the smaller projects. Currently, our senior planner does a phenomenal job, but she does have to kind of man and staff the department on her own when I'm, in meetings or doing, other tasks. So it'll just create a situation where we can provide a better level of service to the community.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's all I have, Mayor.
Great questions. I think you took most of mine, but I'm going to jump in anyway and ask a couple more questions, follow-up questions about the maintenance worker and also the associate planner position. So the maintenance worker, position 1 or position 2. So we have here approximate at least $75,000 budgeted for this position. Is that amount is that the average between the two, whether we hired a 1 or a 2?
No, we're budgeting it as a 2.
As a 2.
But we're leaving flexibility in the recruitment for a 1 or a 2. Again, as I stated before, there are pros and cons with going with a 1 or going with a 2, right? So with a 2, you do bring in some inherent experience. They might be able to hit the ground running a little bit more if you get the right fit. But again, I think that especially with a small team like ours, really it's about fit, and our guys don't mind if someone maybe doesn't know everything. They don't mind training and helping out a new person that's maybe new to the game, so to speak. But then the initiative that would actually create some budgetary savings because you're staffing it as a 1, but that does build in some capacity then to promote somebody to a 2, whether it's that new person or maybe one of our existing employees, depending on who is showing that ability to go into a 2. So it does give us that flexibility there. But as far as the budgetary number, it's for a 2.
It's for a 2. And what would a maintenance worker 1? What would be the cost for that?
I think it's about a 10% difference, I think. I can't remember what the differential between the 1 and the 2 is. It might be 10 or 15. I'm not sure what the difference is.
Okay.
I can't recall off the top of my head.
And what sort of expertise does a 2 have over a 1, or is it just raw experience?
It's usually years of experience, maybe some certifications, things like that. But I'm looking at the job descriptions. Typically, it just is experience. So it's entry level versus journeyman, which means that they do have some municipal public works experience.
And Madi, a 1 or a 2, you think could serve the needs that you have, or do you have a slight preference for a 2?
I think I agree with Will. It gives us some flexibility as well for when we do want to, create that additional lead position. Having a maintenance worker, hiring a maintenance worker 2, maybe we could have a little bit more options for when we want to promote to that. Or, we could always hire outside, but I know we do like to be able to promote our staff within. So it does give us a little bit more flexibility with that as well. Not saying that a maintenance worker 1 wouldn't be able to get there by that time, but yeah, I think it's just kind of leaves it open for us to decide, and maybe we get a better applicant pool for the maintenance worker 2 than we do the maintenance worker 1.
Right.
And so we go with that, or the other way around.
And is that the idea, just to throw out the job application, see who responds to the applications, and then hire accordingly?
Exactly. That's right.
Okay.
And I'd like to clarify that Will was correct. It's approximately a 15% increase between maintenance worker 1 and 2.
Oh, okay.
The salary.
Pretty significant. Okay. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. And then I think, Kelly, you might have answered my questions about the associate planner, but maybe you can just speak a little bit more about kind of the workload you've been under and maybe the backlog we've been seeing in our planning department, and how this position is going to really help maybe that process.
Sure.
Provide example or something of that.
So I think the council knows we have thousands of residential units going through the entitlement or re-entitlement process, significant square footage of industrial land uses being proposed, as well as commercial. We have new school sites and future phases proposed and whatnot. And for the larger, more complicated specific plan projects, there's also a level of negotiation that happens, right, with the development agreements, and that can take, as we found, several months to get through those processes. I've also recently, as you alluded to, at the beginning of the meeting with the new title, I've taken on building and safety and code enforcement, and so my time is now also stretched pretty significantly with having 2 additional departments underneath me, needing to manage personnel, counter coverage, and issues that come along with code enforcement and whatnot. And so having another person in the department will help me funnel some of my workload because I still work on active projects. In some cities, directors aren't working on the project basis. They're really kind of higher level. They do long range or advanced planning, which I do, but I also do current planning. So I'm project manager on quite a few projects. So I'd be able to funnel some of the current planning over to our senior planner, who could then funnel counter questions, ADUs, patio covers, temporary events. All of those things could be then funneled to the associate planner. So it would kind of trickle down and allow my workload to lighten, and therefore just allow a better distribution of the workloads within the department.
Yeah.
And I also want to say too, I mean, I think this really came into focus when Kelly was out because of the amount of staffing we have, and having had to try to count on MBI to step up. And again, it's no knock on them. It's just hard. I mean, it's hard for a contract planner. They're not going to be able to give you the same service as somebody that's in-house in terms of working knowledge of what's going on, because our employee is only doing our stuff, whereas we're sharing that resource with MBI with a number of different clients, right? And so they're just not going to be able to, they may have more planning expertise maybe initially, but they're not going to, they're going to lose out on the Calamasa experience that we'd only get with a full-time employee. And the other thing Kelly mentioned is something that I've really wanted to emphasize longer term, and that is having the ability to focus more on advanced planning, because we are so focused on current planning because it's all we can do, that we don't have the capacity to focus on advanced planning as much as we do. So advanced planning are things like your general plan updates, your housing element, that kind of thing, things that we have to do, but we haven't done a general plan update since 2014, right? A comprehensive general plan update. So we're overdue for that. The standard is 10 years. Now, granted, most cities don't do 10 years, but you know we're pushing 15, right, and maybe getting close to 20. And so, but by the time we actually get there, it probably will be closer to 20. And so I've wanted to be able to have Kelly have the ability to do that, and this addition to this position is a step in that direction. It's not the only step we need to take, but it is a step in that direction. And you know, eventually, long-term goal for all of our department heads are to be troop department heads. I think there's never going to be, I don't know, there's really no place that's effective and that's efficient, that the directors have just no, they're not working managers, so to speak, 100%. But here we are a lot. And I think eventually our goal is long-term goal is to get away from that. That'll take time, but it's incremental steps like this that allow us to get there, you know, over time.
Thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. So assuming this position gets approved, the timeline would be after the
fiscal year starts. So, you know, we could start recruiting as soon as the budget adoption, so we know that the position's formally approved, so that at least we get it to, you know, it probably won't be July 1, but we could prepare to get the job flown, and then there's, you know, a recruitment time, and then, you know, calling for interviews, doing first interviews, second interviews, onboarding, all that stuff. So they're not going to be able to start July 1, but we do plan on, typically when we get new positions approved, we do get to work on the recruitment prior to July 1. It's not like we're just starting July 1 at that process. We're starting usually a little before that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Any other follow-up questions from council? Anything else? Okay.
I just want to piggyback on that with Kelly, because you know I've been there a few times with your team, and it's hard when they leave and then you have to retrain again, and then it's just constantly a turnover, and then it takes time away because you got to train that person to build them up, and then they leave. So it's a good investment having that person there, because you're going to build that person up, and then now they're going to be consistent there daily, and then now you're able to depend and rely on that person, and then they're going to know the Calamasa way, and they're going to know all the codes, all the policies, and everything. They'll be able. It's a big support, and I agree with Marty too with you know promoting within. It's always, you gotta promote within, and then if anything, just, hire from the outside. So, yeah, just wanted to kind of include that as well, too.
Okay, well, that, did we need there's no resolution or anything?
Yeah, no, this is just receive and file. So we've got our direction based on our feedback. So the main takeaway is looking at the council travel budget and bringing that back for further discussion. I think that's the only action item that I can recall. Other than that, looks like we're in pretty good shape. So.
Okay. All right, with that, we are going to adjourn this meeting at 6:40 to our next regular city council meeting on May 4th.